Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Happening right now, drug addiction in the United States has reached epidemic proportions. What's worse, only 11% of those people will find the right treatment. It's time to eliminate the stigma and focus on a tangible solution rather than the problem. Raising her two beloved children in downtown Manhattan, Mallory Neuberger was living a double life, holding down a successful career, running marathons, eating healthy, married to a wonderful new husband, and hiding a soul-crushing drug addiction from everyone she loved. As the daughter of an alcoholic mother, Mallory learned to hide things at an early age, so when she found herself unable to stop snorting cocaine or find a solution, she was resigned to dying alone with her secret addiction. This is her story of addiction, recovery, and opening and running women's sober houses in Delray Beach, Florida. It's also about her years of pain and isolation followed by growth, change, and immense happiness and joy surrounded by people she loves and cares about. Mallory hopes that her story will help anyone struggling with or interested in addiction to find the peace, joy, and serenity that she has in living a sober life today, one day at a time. Mallory Neuberger is a Master of Science and a certified CRRA, author of Sober.House, My Story. She's the executive director of the Frog Pad, a safe and structured holistic healing house for women in recovery from drugs and alcohol. After struggling with her own addiction, she has dedicated her life to help others find sobriety, volunteering at drug recovery centers, including Halsden, the Addiction Institute in New York City, God's Love We Deliver, and soup kitchens. She was also employed at Behavioral Health of the Palm Beaches before opening her first sober house. Here to discuss her new book, Sober.House, My Story, is Mallory Neuberger. Mallory, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you.
Mallory, I have personal experience in this particular area, not to go into too many details or to name names, but someone very close to my daughter, had a hidden addiction, and one pill, one slip during a very sober time where he was clean and sober for 10 straight months. One pill was laced with fentanyl and killed him. And it only took that one pill to end his very young life. So I've experienced this. I've seen this. No one knew for many years that he had this problem with painkillers, and it happened from an accident, and medication was prescribed, and that was where the process began. No one monitored it. He came to work every day. He was faithful to do good work, but nevertheless, he was still treating his addiction with medication on a regular basis. So this is kind of a much more common story than most people realize, isn't it?
Yes.
You grew up in a house with a alcoholic mother.
I did.
How apparent was it to you that your mom had a problem?
It was very apparent. My mother would fall down on the floor. She would fall outside of restaurants. She would crash cars. She was drunk all the time.
And so how did this impact? Was there a custody? Was there a divorce? What was behind all of this? What was going on that here you were a young child witnessing these things?
My family did not discuss my mother's drinking. And, even within our family unit of my father and my two brothers, we would experience these horrible nights with my mother. And the next morning, nobody would discuss it. So there was a night where my brother and I picked my mother up and we put her to bed on the floor of our kitchen with a blanket and a pillow because we couldn't get her up. And when we woke up in the morning, she was back in her room and nobody would discuss it. So I was taught that we didn't discuss alcohol and it was something to be ashamed of and hidden. And even within my own family, I couldn't get anyone to talk to me about it. So I thought my mother was a weak person with a problem that had to be hidden. And I was never going to be like that. That was my goal from a young age.
When did you start?
The first time I took a drug, I was 12. And, I didn't become an addict that first day, but that was my first experience.
Did this lead to help me with understanding the environment? So you have a father, you have two brothers, and you have a mom who drinks. Mom
Yes.
drinks every day.
Yes.
Okay. Dad gets up and goes to work.
I can't hear you.
Your father gets up every day and goes to work.
Yeah, so my father would go to sleep early every night, and my mother would stay up in the kitchen drinking, smoking cigarettes, trying to get people to talk on the phone to her, bothering us. And my father would get up super early in the morning and go to work, and my mother would lie in bed for most of the day in the dark. And then when she got up, she would start drinking again.
And this was the kind of the norm of your growing up existence. Was there church? Were there friends and family? Were there family celebrations? What was life like for you? Because this doesn't sound like a situation that would be easy for you to function in and not get addicted, not fall into the trap.
I grew up Jewish, and my family was extremely reform, and we would go to temple on holy holidays. I did attend Hebrew school when I was a child until I was 13, and I loved it. We would have holidays at our house, like Passover, where my mother and my grandmother, who was her mom and also an alcoholic, would get really drunk on Manischewitz wine. And I enjoyed these holidays a lot. And I really loved my rabbi. I loved temple. And when I was 13, I wanted to have a bat mitzvah. And my parents told me I couldn't have one because they felt I just wanted to have a big party. And I really actually did want to have a bat mitzvah, but my older brother hadn't had a bar mitzvah, so I wasn't able to have it. And we continued to go to temple just twice a year on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And when I was in my middle teens, all of a sudden my father stopped wanting to go to temple. And we had lost 2 family members to tragic illnesses. And I remember going to my father and asking him if he still believed in God. And he looked at me and he said, "We'll discuss this when you're older." So at that moment, I understood that my father had lost faith. So I decided that if he didn't believe, I wasn't going to believe anymore because he was my role model.
Mallory, I grew up in a Jewish home and was bar mitzvahed and confirmed, and I completely identify with the my father would only go to synagogue on the high holy days. My grandparents were, of course, Orthodox. They came from the old country. My father, our name was changed from Vovovich to Walker so that we could assimilate into the American world as opposed to the Hungarian Jewish immigrant world. And so I fully understand. And alcohol was a big part of celebrations. I grew up in a home where there was a lot of alcohol. I don't know. There was nobody falling down, but I know that there was always a lot of alcohol involved. But I left home right after I was confirmed and went off to boarding school. So didn't really maintain a very close relationship, except a close long-distance relationship. So when you were surrounded by other Jewish kids, and this was for you. I think you're quite a bit younger than I am. Was this the 80s?
I'm 58.
Okay.
So I grew up in the 70s.
So I'm 10 years older than you, so
You look good.
well, thank you very much. That's very kind. Uh, so drug use was casual in this was something that a lot of Jewish kids got involved in, and was not problematic. There wasn't a lot of addiction. There was recreational drug use, but there wasn't addictive drug use that anybody was aware of. I don't remember anybody in high school, anybody at any bar mitzvah parties. I remember, people going out back and would smoke a joint, but it wasn't until college that there became more frequent use and more experimentation, and this was actually in, the 68 to 72 time period, so this was right in the heart of it. So you didn't have a faith model. You loved your rabbi, but yet your father, who was the one who kind of was in the normal Jewish home, the mother, it's a matriarchal. Mom's the one that schlepped you to Hebrew school. Mom's the one that schlepped you to everything. But in your case, that wasn't really as possible and as plausible because of Mom's problem. So did you have friends ever come over?
Yes. I mean, when I was younger, my parents were extremely social and they were quite glamorous. I remember, as a young girl, my mother wearing sequins and fur coats, and my father dressed beautifully, and they would be going out to events all the time. We had parties at our house often. They had beautiful friends. We had a very close-knit community. And as my mother's drinking progressed and got worse and worse, my parents' social circle became a lot smaller. And we moved from one town on Long Island to another when I was 15 years old. And I felt that was because my mother's drinking had become so public that my parents wanted to get out of that town. And once we moved to Port Washington, which was only 15 minutes away, my parents really weren't socializing the way that they had been before. And they would go out for dinner at 6 o'clock at night. My mother's drinking would typically worsen as it got later in the evening. So I watched that shrink, and I would have friends over all the time, and I would have sleepovers, but my mother was getting more and more drunk and more embarrassing. And I was really afraid to have friends over at night because I was afraid my mother would come into my room. She would wear see-through nightgowns. She was drunk. She would be smoking a Benson & Hedges 100, holding her left hand as an ashtray. She would come to my room basically naked and be really inappropriate with my friends, flicking ashes into her hand. And I was just really afraid to have people there. So I would keep them in my room and go to the kitchen by myself if my mother was awake. And it definitely affected my younger brother the most. My older brother had gone off to college at that point, so he was the least affected. I feel like I was super affected because I always had this part of me that wanted to help people. And I knew something was wrong with my mother, and I just wanted to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But I wasn't able to. And I never told anybody that my mother had a drinking problem until I went to college. And when I got to college, I became friendly with 5 other women who all had an alcoholic parent, and they discussed it.
So you talked about it, but yet you were still hiding. You still had your own secret. You had your own way of coping with the pain.
I wasn't a drug addict then.
Okay, when did that start?
I mean, the first time I tried Coke, I was 17 years old, and I tried a tiny amount. And, I think for anyone who's an alcoholic or a drug addict, there's a specific thing that really hooks us immediately. And cocaine was the one drug that I tried that I just absolutely fell in love with from that first day. And I was able to use cocaine on and off from the ages of 17 until I was in my late 40s before I became completely addicted to the point where I knew I was going to die. I had had problems with it earlier. I had had a night in college that was out of control. I had had a night in my early 30s when I had 2 babies at home and I did cocaine all night, and my husband threatened to take the children away from me. And I put down coke for 13 years at that point without getting help for it. And I was able to drink like a normal person. But 13 years later, I started back with the cocaine, and that's when things got really bad for me.
So you come to this crossroad. You have the perfect storm. You have a mom who is a blatant alcoholic. You have these latent tendencies to be attracted to your drug of choice is cocaine, but you can use other things to kind of divert your attention from it. But yet it's still in the back of your mind. You still, addiction is a lot of mental ownership. It takes up residence. It's a repetitive thought, repetitive focal point that sometimes appears almost blindsides you as it comes into your thinking. It's not something that always occupies every minute. We tend to think of the drug addict as being from fix to fix to fix to fix to fix, and that's really not correct, is it?
Not for me and not for a lot of us. It's a mental obsession that you talk about. And that mental obsession is part of the disease of addiction. And addiction is a disease, it's not a character weakness. And I think a lot of people don't get the help they need because they feel that they're a failure at life and that people are judging us because we have this addiction. And that was the case for me. I just thought that I was a weak person and that I had to hide my drug addiction at all costs, even if it meant dying.
So did you find that you were using your mother's identity as being your benchmark, and as you measured yourself against her and her problems, and you saw yourself through that lens as being somebody who was weak and out of control and almost an embarrassment?
At the very end, there was a night where I looked at myself in the mirror in my bathroom and I had fallen down and my face was broken and I was covered in bruises and my mother was literally staring back at me. But I felt that I was worse than her because alcohol was legal and cocaine wasn't. And that was one of the darkest moments of my addiction.
So, did your husband stick with you through all this, or was this something that wound up causing the marriage to end?
My husband is my 4th husband, and I met him when I was already doing cocaine again, and he had no idea that I was doing it. So I was hiding my drug use from him and from everybody else other than the people I bought it from and did it with. And my husband has stayed with me, and he's been incredible. He's been a real support.
Is your mom alive? Is your father alive today?
My mother died 9.5 years ago, and it was from alcohol-related problems. My father is still alive. He's 87, and he lives in Las Vegas. And he drinks every day, but he's not an alcoholic. He functions quite well, and he was the one I was trying to drink like. I can't drink anymore, though. Right. I had to give it all up.
I understand. So in your journey for help, what did you find was available to you, and how did that impact your life?
Can I talk about the religious moment I had now, or do you want me to talk about treatment and solution?
Let's introduce the religious component to it, and then we're going to go to break in 2 minutes, and when we come back from break, we'll pick it up there.
Okay, so 7 years ago, I was at Temple with my husband and his parents on the Upper West Side, and I was sitting in between my husband and my father-in-law. My mother-in-law was on the bema, and I was completely broken. I knew I was going to die. I couldn't stop doing drugs. My hands were shaking. I was depressed. I was anxious. And the rabbi who had married us 1 year earlier in his chambers upstairs at the temple said, "Take a moment of silent prayer." And I heard him say those words, and I closed my eyes and I said silently, "Please help me." And I just started crying. So for 4 days over Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, every time he said, "Take a moment of silent prayer," I just closed my eyes and I said, "Please help me." And that was the first prayer I had ever made in 51 years that was not asking for something as a bargaining tool. I don't know what made me say those words, but they were the words that I believe led me to getting sober.
So you cried out to God for help, and God began doing a brand new work in you. We're talking with Mallory Neuberger, author of Sober.House, My Story, a story of addiction, but a story of celebrating recovery and being able to talk in retrospect and also in current terms about the process in which she found help and the process in which you too can find help and the kind of support that's available for this epidemic problem of not only alcoholism but drug addiction as well. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll return to talk about Sober.House, My Story with Mallory Neuberger. We'll be right back.
Not everything that makes the headlines has biblical importance, but many events that happen around the world do, and you never hear about them. Igniting a Nation is pleased to teach Revealing Prophecy every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. at the Marriott 280 in Birmingham. We will cover worldwide events and insider information that will connect the dots of what's happening around the world with biblical prophecy. If you happen to miss a class, we'll televise each week's class at 10 o'clock Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our social media outlets. Copies of the teachings will also be available to purchase on our website at www.ignitinganation.com. The Lord meets you right where you are, and so does Igniting a Nation's new live streaming outlets. You can now watch Revealing the Truth, Revealing the Bible, and Prophecy Revealed simulcast live each Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 1 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time on YouTube Live, Facebook Live, Vimeo, Periscope, and through our website, www.ignitinganation.com. No matter what device you are using, our program will automatically scale so you won't have to miss a single program. And if you happen to miss an episode, you can always subscribe to the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel and access over 1,000 interviews and never miss your favorite authors, special guests, and topics that interest you the most.
There are lots of ways to see Israel, but nothing compares to seeing the land of the book and the people of the book through the eyes of two Jewish believers who can take you on a journey that will bring the entire Bible to life. When you join Rabbi Eric Walker and his #1 rated tour guide, Edo Canaan, in Israel, you'll experience incredible teachings, first-class accommodations, and actually walk where Jesus walked. You will experience the Bible transforming from black and white into living color, and you will never see the Bible in the same way again. For more information, visit us at www.ignitinganation.com/events.
The Lord contends with what contends with you, and Igniting a Nation is committed to bringing to light each and every issue that faces a believer's life. Our live stream programming and teachings take you on a journey to finding biblical truth from a wide variety of experts who share their insights into a deeper walk with the Lord. We have assembled the most comprehensive panel of experts in the fields of prophecy, caregiving, healing from trauma, shame, and abuse, and so much more. We continue to expand our teachings and programming to meet your needs. We're committed to healing the nations with biblical truth. Visit www.ignitinganation.com to develop a deeper walk with the Lord and start your journey to a transformed life. The Bible commands us to study to show ourselves approved, but most study using Bible study tools and not actually studying the Bible chapter and verse. Igniting a Nation is pleased to present Revealing the Bible, recorded and taught each week before a live audience. We take you deeper into the actual Bible and verse in both Hebrew and English and connect the dots between the Old and New Testament. You can attend our 2 classes in Tuscaloosa and Birmingham or watch the program every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Central Time on ignitinganation.com and all our other simulcast outlets. For more information, visit www.ignitinganation.com/events.
Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Mallory Neuberger, author of Sober.House, My Story. Mallory, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you.
Mallory, it must have been very difficult for you in those teenage years to see your mother and what was going on. It wound up costing her life. And unfortunately, it gave you a model which was not stable, reflected in multiple marriages, reflected in different addictions at different times in your life, and a price that's paid. Now, you had young children during a period of your struggle. How was that impactful to your children?
When I was pregnant, I just really missed being able to drink and do coke. I wasn't going to do them because I really wanted to have healthy children and take care of them. But I have to say that I couldn't wait for the babies to be born so that I could drink again and smoke cigarettes and do cocaine. It was pretty controlled at that time. You know, it's not like I was doing cocaine often by any means, but I did do it a couple of times. And when my son Jack was a newborn and my daughter Morgan was 2, there was a night where I got some coke and my husband went to sleep, their father, and I had a big job and I had to be at work in the morning, and I stayed up all night finishing the coke. When my husband woke up in the morning, Jack was crying. He had reflux. He needed to be picked up and cared for, and I could not pick him up. I was afraid, and I was in so much fear. I just did not know what to do, and there was no way I could go to work. And my husband basically said to me, if you ever do this again, I am taking these children away from you. And that scared me straight for 13 years. So my children were not affected at a young age by drug use.
Okay, so now your kids are grown. How old are they now?
22 and 24.
Okay, and Mom tells this story of a hidden life. First, do you go to the family and tell them and reveal to them what's going on with you? How does this process work in your life of revelation? You have this experience in the synagogue. You cry out to God, and God is faithful to answer you. And he brings you a sense of comfort, a sense of shalom, a peace that passes all understanding. And you begin to realize that, as the Bible says, it says, Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, maker of heaven and earth. This is something that in Jewish liturgy we hear all the time, but now all of a sudden it becomes personal. So do you go to your husband and tell him that you're struggling with his addiction? Do you go to your children? You begin to get help? What's the process for you?
So one night I stayed up all night, locked in the bathroom, doing coke, which is what I would do. And I kept falling unconscious on the floor, and I kept coming to, and I would try and pull myself up, and then I would wake up on the floor again. So the third time I fell, I hit my head very hard on the stone floor, and I probably had a concussion. I had a huge, like baseball-sized bump on the back of my head, which was bleeding. And my husband woke up. It was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and he asked me what happened. And I had been wanting to tell him for a long time that I had a problem, but I was afraid if I told him, he was going to leave me. And I thought if anyone knew that I was doing coke, that I would lose my job, my children, my husband, my father, my brothers, my friends. I had so much shame about it. So that morning, I sat him down and I told him that I had a drug addiction. And he asked me if I wanted to go to the emergency room, and I said no, because I would not go to the doctor because I didn't want them to find drugs. And he asked me if I wanted to go to rehab, and I said no. Nobody can know that I have a drug addiction. So I thought that by telling him I would be able to stop, but I couldn't. So for a couple of weeks, I continued hiding my cocaine use, and I just couldn't stop. And I found a doctor on the internet, and he was Jewish, and he also had a PhD in clinical psychology as well as an MD. And I just thought, this doctor is going to understand. He's going to understand if I go to him. And so I went to his office, and I basically told him everything. For the first time, I walked into a stranger's office. I walked into his examining room, and I burst into tears. And I told him I was living a double life, that I was running marathons, eating healthy, had a great job, and that I was smoking cigarettes, drinking alcohol, snorting cocaine, and taking downers, sleeping pills and benzos to go to sleep. And he looked at me and he said, "You're going to die. You need to go to Hazelden. They have an outpatient program in Chelsea. We were in Soho where I lived. And he said that you can go there in the afternoons." And I left his office and I called Hazelden and I went directly there. When I walked into Hazelden an hour or so later, the man who talked to me was also a cocaine addict in recovery. I burst into tears and I told him my story, and he burst into tears along with me. And he told me that I needed to go to a Cocaine Anonymous meeting, which was starting about 45 minutes later, a couple of blocks away. I left Hazelden. I went to the Cocaine Anonymous meeting. There were 3 people in the meeting, and it was at lunchtime. And the 3 of them were all free of drugs. They were happy. They were laughing. They were smiling. I burst into tears for the 3rd time that morning and shared with them what was going on. And they took my phone numbers and they gave me hope that I could be okay.
So what does help look like for an addict? Let's start with the process and walk me through the 12-step process. The first step, of course, is that you have to admit that you have a problem, and that was the beginning of your first step, was seeking out this doctor, then going to Hazelden, which is we'll call it the Betty Ford Clinic, because I think most people know it as that. and they instructed you to go to CA, Cocaine Anonymous, like NA, Narcotics Anonymous, or AA, Alcoholics Anonymous. And what happens? What is the process of recovery?
For me, Hazelden was really crucial in my sobriety because I learned all about the disease. I learned about cross addiction, which I had not believed in. I had worked in a treatment center in New York as a volunteer, which was harm reduction. So if you were addicted to cocaine, you could drink alcohol, you could smoke pot. And it had become, a new school of science and thought since that time that once you are addicted to a substance, you need to stop all mood and mind altering substances. So I went to Hazelden telling them that I was there to stop Coke, but that I would not stop drinking. And they told me it was complete abstinence, and I told them I would not stay if I couldn't drink. So the first day of Hazelden, I did have a drink. I had one glass of wine, and I immediately wanted Coke. And for 2 hours, I tried to get Coke. I chased my drug dealer who wasn't answering the phone. I looked all around my neighborhood for drugs. And finally, the craving passed. I went into my apartment building. My dealer's number showed up on my screen. I turned my phone off, and I've never had a drink since. So on day 2 of rehab, I walked in and I said, guess what? I am an alcoholic too. I'm cross-addicted. I realize now that alcohol is a gateway for me to cocaine. So that was a huge thing for me. Learning that I had a disease lifted the shame and guilt the very first day. And I started going to AA meetings or CA meetings every single day. I was told to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I've been sober now for 6.5 years. I go to a meeting every single day. I pray for help every morning. I ask my higher power to help keep me sober today. And then I go to a meeting. I sponsor other women, so that means I work women through the 12 steps. I got a sponsor at my first CA meeting. It was a gay man in New York, and he was my first sponsor, and he worked the 12 steps with me for the first 8 months of my recovery, at which time I switched to a different sponsor. But I believe that addiction is a disease that needs to be treated every single day. We need to reset our brains when we wake up in the morning, because I don't wake up thinking I'm a drug addict. I wake up thinking, my dog wants to go for a walk. I need a cup of coffee. I want to brush my teeth. So I stop myself every morning. I pause and I say, please help keep me sober today. Please help me to be of service. Please help me to be kind, loving, present, patient, honest. And then I say, thy will, not mine, be done. And these are all things that I learned in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is the program I practice today.
Help me understand something. If I declare, as we've seen, I've never been to an AA meeting or a CA meeting or an NA meeting. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs, so I've never had the call to do that. You declare that you are a drug addict. You declare that you are an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, from a psychological perspective, if I reaffirm every day that I am something, do I not stay in that posture? Or in the world of psychology, I'm healed, I'm cured, I was an addict, but I'm no longer an addict, as opposed to the declaration that, hi, my name is Mallory and I'm an alcoholic, or as opposed to I am a recovered alcoholic. I understand the concept that it is being a disease, but if I have cancer and I'm cured of cancer, I'm a cancer survivor. If I am Is this something that is presented as a chronic condition versus an acute condition? I'm trying to understand from a psychological perspective how you position it by that declaration of reaffirming something that happens to be a positive negative.
It's absolutely a chronic lifetime illness. And one of the reasons I go to meetings every single day is to hear the stories of people who thought after years that they could have one drink or they could have one hit of pot and or one painkiller or one Xanax, and people who go for surgery and they're prescribed opiates for surgery, they end up addicted again, abusing medication again, even with careful planning. And so I feel like addiction is the worst and the best disease to have. It's the worst disease to have because it never goes away. And I believe that I will be a drug addict and an alcoholic for the entire duration of my life. And I've seen people who have 15 years, 36 years, 17 years, all kinds of amounts of time, who have thought that they were okay, or they have stopped working the 12-step program on a regular basis, and they either end up dying or they end up much worse than they ever were. And people always say that it's harder to come back and get sober again than to stay. So I choose to stay. And I love the program. The program has given me a sense of meaning and purpose. It's given me a sense of belonging that I never felt in my family growing up. I feel like I kept going from husband to husband because I had a big hole inside of my soul and nothing could fill it up. Absolutely nothing. When I finally came to AA and CA, I felt at home for the very first time. And I absolutely love it. You know, I've learned how to live happy, joyous, and free. I'm no longer filled with expectations that are never going to be fulfilled. So I had high expectations of everyone, and I was constantly feeling let down and disappointed. I was doing things for others because I wanted something in return. This program has taught me that we do things without any expectation of receiving anything in return. It's the most loving, beautiful, giving program that I have ever experienced.
And how has this impacted your relationship with your husband and your children?
Well, my daughter's an alcoholic, and she found out that I was in recovery when I had 11 days sober. She had just started college, and I did not want her to know this, but she was the only person who ever suspected, because she was hiding alcoholism in her room, which was next to my room where I was hiding my cocaine addiction. So she had a couple of suspicions and nobody else did. So she came to me for help, and she called me from college and told me that she had a problem and that she needed help. So it's been a beautiful thing to be able to watch my daughter put down alcohol at the age of 20, which was killing her, just the way Coke was killing me. And our relationship she's always been my best friend, but the relationship that we have today is on a whole different level than it ever was. My son, Jack, was completely, involved with video games and sports, and I didn't tell him that I was a drug addict in recovery until I was sober for a year and a half. I told him I had stopped drinking, but he thought that was because I wanted to run faster in my next marathon. And I never told him that. He just knew I was really about being healthy, so he thought I had stopped drinking to be healthier. So when I told him 18 months later that I was a drug addict in recovery, he asked me if I had ever done drugs in front of him. And it was one of the happiest things that he could have said, because it made me realize that even when I was using in those last couple of years, and he was living with me in our house in New York City, that he had no idea. I saw where I was failing. I saw that, where I was not showing up the way I should have, but he was not, he was unscathed by that. And he actually came to an AA meeting with me that day. And people asked him if he was a drug addict or an alcoholic. And he said, no, my mother's a drug addict and an alcoholic, and I'm here to support her. And after the meeting, he told me that AA was filled with gay men and religious fanatics, and that he didn't want to go back. And he's a normie. He doesn't have a problem. And he's amazing. And he's the best boy in the whole world.
Well, it's wonderful to hear you speak so highly of him. The book was written so that you could do what?
I wrote this book so that I could share my deepest, darkest secrets with other people who are struggling or who know somebody who's struggling, to help them to see that hiding behind a disease is going to kill us. It's going to keep us miserable. Addiction wants us using, miserable, and dead. And I have seen in the 6.5 years that I've been sober, and in the 4+ years since I opened the Frog Pad, which are my sober houses for women, that, people just still don't understand that addiction is a disease. And people look down at us. They feel sorry for us. And this keeps people, sick. It keeps people sick. And there are people who don't even want to know me because they know I'm a drug addict in recovery. Doctors don't understand. It's just a huge, huge problem. 1 out of 10 people is either an alcoholic or a drug addict. Only 11% of those, as you said, find long-term sobriety. And I feel like bearing my soul to the world, if it helps one other person to find sobriety and to live a life free of substances and helping others, it's worthwhile.
Have you found that by telling your story over and over again, are you getting responses? Are you getting people reaching out to you? Are you finding that there's a certain amount of safety that you've been able to create? Is there a website that we can send people to contact you for help?
I have a website called The Frog, Frog, Pad, PAD, Delray Beach. It's DELRAY Beach.com. My phone is always on, and people can call me there at 917-453-4696. I've held on to my New York City phone number, even though I live in Florida now. Yes, people call me day and night. I get calls from families. I get calls from people who see me on Facebook. I get calls from people who have heard of the house or who find my house on the Florida Association of Recovery Residents' website. Treatment centers recommend me today. I don't talk about business in AA meetings because that's frowned upon, so I don't talk about my book. I don't talk about my sober houses. But I do share regularly about how incredible my life has become since I got sober, and because of this program, which saves millions of people's lives. I also have my book is on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, and it's on ebook. Okay. And I was just reviewed by Kirkus. And so the Kirkus review of my book was a recommended review, and it's available on Kirkus.
Good. Now, the 2 frog houses, how many residents do you have in each?
There are 10 in House 1 and 7 in House 2.
Okay, so you're actively involved in this, or do you have a team of professionals, or do you host 12-step or CA or NA meetings there at the Frog Pad?
We're not supposed to do any treatment or meetings within the houses. That's a law in Florida. I'm involved on a daily basis, 24/7 pretty much, with all of the residents in the houses and my staff. I have staff who live on property. I have incredible staff who are all women in recovery who work wonderful 12-step programs. And we keep the women accountable. We make sure that they're sober from drugs and alcohol. They need to be attending 12-step meetings, working with a sponsor. And, we promote a healthy lifestyle as well. And fun. Fun is a really big part of what we do. Because if we're going to be miserable and sober, we're not going to want to stay sober. So finding joy without alcohol and drugs is something I did not think was possible for me, having used drugs for 39 years. And I found that life is so much freer and more beautiful sober for me.
Well, that's quite a strong message. The book is called Sober.House, My Story by Mallory Neuberger. She raised 2 children in downtown Manhattan, lived a double life, as many drug addicts do, and alcoholics do live a double life and are hiding behind a mask, but ultimately the mask fades and what's left is a life which is crushed, and the people around you are crushed by it as well, but there is help for you, whether or not it's through a synagogue, through a church, through CA, NA, AA. There are many 12-step programs around and Celebrate Recovery, many excellent programs, but the first step, as in all cases, is that you must look at yourself and identify that there is a problem. Mallory Neuberger, thank you so much for sharing this story with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you very much.
God bless. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.